The biting wind howled across the barren Montana landscape, carrying with it stinging pellets of ice that felt like needles against any exposed skin. Declan Galloway hunched lower in his saddle, tugging his sheepskin coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he urged his faithful chestnut gelding forward through the growing blizzard. It was 1878, and winter in the Northern Territories showed no mercy to man nor beast. "Come on, Thunder," he muttered through chapped lips, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Just a few more miles to the cabin. We ain't dying out here today." The 16-hand horse snorted in response, its hooves crunching through the deepening snow. Declan had been a fool to stay so long in town, but the poker game at Madisonville's only saloon had been too tempting. His pockets were heavier with winnings, but now he questioned whether the money was worth risking his life in this unexpected storm. The path to his small ranch was becoming increasingly difficult to discern as daylight faded and snow accumulated. What had started as flurries that morning had transformed into a raging blizzard by afternoon. Declan was an experienced frontiersman at 32 years of age, but even he knew the deadly seriousness of being caught in the open during a Montana winter storm. Thunder suddenly jerked his head up, ears swiveling forward. Declan immediately tensed, one hand moving toward the Colt revolver at his hip. In these parts, danger came in many forms: wolves, bandits, or desperate men driven to extremes by the harsh conditions. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, squinting into the swirling white. The horse nickered softly and began moving forward of his own accord, veering slightly off their usual trail. Trusting the animal's instincts, Declan loosened the reins and allowed Thunder to lead. After several minutes, a dark shape materialized through the blinding snow, something that didn't belong in this wilderness. As he drew closer, Declan's heart hammered against his ribs. It was a person, half buried in a snowdrift. A woman, from the looks of the long hair whipping in the wind, and the remains of a tattered dress visible beneath a threadbare coat. "Christ almighty," Declan muttered, dismounting with a grunt. His boots sank deep into the snow as he trudged toward the prone figure. Kneeling beside her, he brushed snow from her face with a gloved hand. Her skin was pale as the snow itself, lips tinged an alarming blue. But when he pressed fingers against her neck, he felt it, the faint but steady pulse that told him she still clung to life. "Miss, can you hear me?" he called over the howling wind, gently shaking her shoulder. She didn't respond, but her eyelids fluttered momentarily. Declan didn't hesitate. There was no time for deliberation, not with night falling and the temperature dropping by the minute. He gathered the woman into his arms, surprised by how little she weighed despite her tall frame. Her head lolled against his chest as he carried her to Thunder. With considerable effort, he managed to mount while holding her, settling her across the saddle in front of him. He cradled her against his chest with one arm while the other held the reins. "Home, Thunder," he commanded, "fast as you can." The horse needed no further encouragement, seemingly understanding the urgency of their situation. Declan hunched over the unconscious woman, using his body to shield her from the worst of the wind and snow as they pressed onward through the growing darkness. It was nearly an hour later when his cabin finally came into view, a solid square structure nestled against a stand of pines that provided some shelter from the wind. Declan had never been so relieved to see the smoke curling from the stone chimney. His morning fire had survived, thank God. Getting the woman inside proved challenging. He dismounted first, then carefully lifted her down, carrying her through the snow to his front door. He shouldered it open, ducking inside the relative warmth of the cabin. "Hold on, miss," he muttered as he gently laid her on his bed, the only bed in the one-room cabin. "Just hold on." He worked quickly, stoking the fire and adding more logs until it roared in the hearth. Then he returned to the woman's side, assessing her condition in the improved light. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps in her mid-20s, with chestnut hair framing delicate features. Her clothes were sodden and frozen, her skin dangerously cold to the touch. Declan knew what needed to be done, though it made him uncomfortable. Hypothermia was a deadly threat, and her wet clothing would only make it worse. With practiced efficiency but careful respect, he removed her outer garments, leaving her in her underclothes. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then pulled a chair close to the fire and carried her there, holding her bundled form near the flames. "You're safe now," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I'll get you warm." When the blankets alone didn't seem to be raising her temperature quickly enough, Declan made a difficult decision. He shed his own coat and boots, then slipped beneath the blankets with her, wrapping his arms around her slight frame. Body heat was the most effective remedy for someone in her condition. He'd seen it save frostbitten cowboys before. He held her through the night as the storm raged outside, occasionally rising only to feed the fire or fetch water to coax between her lips. By morning, her breathing had steadied and color had begun returning to her cheeks. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the cabin's small window when Declan felt her stir in his arms. He'd dozed off himself, exhaustion finally claiming him after the long night of vigilance. He awakened instantly when she moved, pulling back slightly to give her space. Her eyes fluttered open, striking amber eyes that widened with alarm when they focused on him. "Easy now," he said softly, releasing her and raising his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "You're safe. I found you in the snow yesterday. You were half frozen." The woman attempted to sit up, then winced and fell back against the pillows. "Where am I?" Her voice was raspy, but carried a refined tone that marked her as educated. "My cabin, about 10 miles outside of Madisonville. Name's Declan Galloway." He moved away to pour her a cup of water. "I've got a small ranch here. Found you during the blizzard yesterday." She accepted the water with shaking hands. After taking a few sips, she regarded him warily. "Olivia Montgomery." "Miss Montgomery," he acknowledged with a nod. "You were in a bad way when I found you. If you don't mind my asking, what were you doing out in that storm?" A shadow passed over her features. She clutched the blankets tighter around herself. "The stagecoach. We were attacked. Highwaymen. I ran when they shot the driver. I got lost in the storm." Declan's jaw tightened. "The Blackwater Pass route?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Damn!" He ran a hand through his dark hair. "That pass has seen trouble before. Did anyone else get away?" "I don't know," she whispered. "There were 2 other passengers, a businessman and an elderly woman. I heard more shots as I ran." Declan moved to the stove, setting a pot of coffee to boil. "Once this storm clears, I'll ride out and check for survivors. For now, you need to rest and get your strength back. You're welcome to stay here until you're well enough to travel." "Thank you," Olivia said softly. "I don't know how to repay your kindness, Mr. Galloway." "Declan," he corrected, "and no payment necessary. Couldn't leave you out there to freeze." As the day progressed, Olivia drifted in and out of sleep, her body recovering from its ordeal. Declan busied himself with chores, venturing out to the stable to tend to Thunder and his other animals once the storm subsided to manageable flurries. He prepared a simple stew for their evening meal, the cabin gradually filling with the hearty aroma of cooking meat and vegetables. By nightfall, Olivia was strong enough to sit at his small table, wrapped in one of his flannel shirts that dwarfed her slender frame. Her own clothes were hanging by the fire, slowly drying. "This is delicious," she commented, taking another spoonful of the stew. Declan shrugged modestly. "When you live alone, you either learn to cook or eat poorly." "Have you always lived alone?" she asked, then immediately shook her head. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "No offense taken." He leaned back in his chair. "Been on my own most of my life. Parents died when I was 16, worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army, then saved enough to buy this place 5 years back." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "It's a lovely cabin. Very," she searched for the right word, "peaceful." "What about you? Where were you headed on that stage?" Declan asked. Her expression clouded. "Helena, I was going to teach at a new school there." "A school teacher," he mused. "Figured you for something like that. You talk like someone with education." A small smile touched her lips. I attended a women's college in Boston. I've been teaching for 3 years now. Boston to Montana territory. That's quite a change. Olivia's gaze dropped to her bowl. I needed a fresh start. Declan sensed there was more to her story, but he didn't press. Everyone in the West had a past they'd rather not discuss. He'd learned long ago not to pry. Well, he said instead, once you're recovered, I can take you to Madisonville. From there, you can catch another stage to Helena. Thank you, she said, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. That night, Declan made a bed for himself on the floor near the hearth, insisting that Olivia take the bed. Despite her protests that she'd already imposed enough, he wouldn't hear of a lady sleeping on the hard wooden planks. As he settled beneath his blankets, staring up at the cabin's log ceiling, Olivia's voice drifted from the bed. Mr. Galloway Declan, she corrected herself. I'm truly grateful. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same, he responded, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. The frontier bred hard men, and not all would risk themselves for a stranger. Nevertheless, she said softly, thank you. Declan listened as her breathing eventually settled into the rhythm of sleep. Outside, the wind still moaned around the eaves, but the worst of the storm had passed. Tomorrow, he would ride to the stagecoach route and see what remained of the attack. For now, though, an unfamiliar sense of contentment settled over him as he drifted to sleep, aware of the gentle presence across the room. The following morning dawned clear and blindingly bright, the fresh snow reflecting the sunlight like millions of diamonds scattered across the landscape. Declan rose early, as was his habit, and rekindled the fire before stepping outside to tend to his livestock. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots at the threshold, he found Olivia awake and attempting to move about the cabin. You should be resting, he admonished gently, noticing her pale face and the way she steadied herself against the table. I've imposed on your hospitality enough, she replied. I thought I might help with breakfast at least. Sit, he instructed, guiding her to a chair. You nearly died from exposure 2 days ago. Your body needs time to recover. Reluctantly, she complied. I'm not accustomed to being idle. Most folks around here would consider recovering from near death as a valid reason for taking it easy, he remarked dryly, as he set about preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with the last of his molasses. Olivia watched him move about the cabin with efficient grace, noting how at ease he seemed in the small space. There was something compelling about this taciturn cowboy with his weathered face and kind eyes. He couldn't be more different from the men she'd known back east, men in tailored suits with soft hands and practiced manners. Declan Galloway was all rough edges and quiet strength, yet there was a gentleness to him that she hadn't expected. I'm riding out to check the stagecoach route after breakfast, he informed her as they ate. See if there's anyone else who needs help, or if... He didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what he meant. If there were bodies that needed proper burial. I should come with you, Olivia suggested, though the thought filled her with dread. Declan shook his head firmly. Not a chance. It's still bitter cold out there, and you're in no condition to ride. Besides, if what you say is true, it might not be a pleasant sight. She couldn't argue with his logic, though the thought of sitting alone in the cabin while he ventured out into potential danger troubled her. Please be careful. The men who attacked us, they were ruthless. I've handled my share of trouble, he assured her, patting the revolver at his hip. I'll be back before sundown. There's food in the pantry if you get hungry, and plenty of firewood stacked by the hearth. Just rest and get your strength back. After he departed, the cabin felt strangely empty despite its small size. Olivia wrapped herself in a blanket and moved to the chair by the window, watching as Declan's figure grew smaller in the distance before disappearing entirely into the vast white landscape. The day passed slowly. True to her nature, Olivia couldn't remain idle for long, despite her weakened state. She tidied what she could, folding blankets and washing the breakfast dishes. She discovered a small bookshelf containing a surprising variety of volumes, history, poetry, and several novels. The sight of the books made her smile. Perhaps there was more to the rugged cowboy than met the eye. By mid-afternoon, concern began to gnaw at her. Surely he should have returned by now. What if he'd encountered the same bandits who attacked the stagecoach? What if he was lying wounded somewhere in that endless expanse of snow? The sun was hanging low on the horizon, casting long blue shadows across the snow when Olivia finally spotted a lone rider approaching. Relief flooded through her, only to be replaced by fresh concern when she noticed Declan was slumped forward in the saddle. She hurried outside, ignoring the bite of cold air against her still recovering body. "Declan!" she called as he drew closer. He raised his head and she saw that his face was grim. When he reached the cabin, he dismounted slowly, favoring his right side. "You're hurt," she said, moving to help him. "Just a graze," he muttered. They were still there, picking through the wreckage. "Got a shot off at me when I rode up?" "Come inside," she urged, supporting some of his weight as they made their way to the cabin. Once inside, she helped him remove his coat, noting the bloodstain on his shirt beneath. "Let me see," she insisted, her voice firm. With a resigned sigh, Declan unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a bloody furrow across his ribs. "Told you, just a graze." "That needs cleaning," Olivia said, already moving to fetch water from the bucket by the stove. "Sit down and let me tend to it." Too tired to argue, Declan complied. He watched as she efficiently gathered what she needed: clean rags, a basin of warmed water, and a bottle of whiskey from his small cupboard. "This will sting," she warned before applying the alcohol-soaked cloth to his wound. Declan hissed between his teeth but didn't pull away. "You've done this before," he observed. "I grew up with 3 brothers," she explained, her touch gentle despite the firmness of her movements, all of whom seemed determined to injure themselves in increasingly creative ways. As she worked, Declan recounted what he'd found at the stagecoach. 2 men dead, the driver and the businessman you mentioned. No sign of the elderly woman. The bandits had been going through the luggage when I arrived. 3 of them. I managed to drive them off, but not before this happened. He gestured to his side. "Did you recognize any of them?" Olivia asked, wrapping a clean bandage around his torso. One of them looked familiar. Might have been one of the Harker boys' bad seeds from down near the Wyoming border. Been causing trouble in these parts for a couple of years now. Olivia's hands stilled. "Will they come here? They saw you." "Doubtful," Declan assured her. "They don't know who I am or where I live, and even if they did, they wouldn't risk attacking an armed man in his own home for no reason. They're opportunists, not vengeful killers." She nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. "What about the others? The passengers?" "I buried the 2 men as best I could in the frozen ground. Said some words over them." He sighed heavily. "The woman might have escaped like you did, or they might have taken her. No way to know for sure." Olivia finished tending his wound and sat back, her face troubled. "Those poor people. If I hadn't run—" "You'd be dead too," Declan said firmly. "You did what anyone would do. You survived." She met his gaze, her amber eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you for going back. For giving them a proper burial." It was the right thing to do. He pulled his shirt back on, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injury. "I'll ride into town tomorrow, let the sheriff know what happened. He can send a telegram to Helena about the attack." That evening, they ate a quiet meal together, both lost in their own thoughts. The shared trauma had created a bond between them, a tentative connection forged in adverse circumstances. Declan found himself studying Olivia when she wasn't looking, noticing the graceful line of her neck, the way her chestnut hair caught the firelight. She was beautiful, certainly, but it was more than that. There was a resilience to her, a quiet strength that he admired. For her part, Olivia was becoming increasingly aware of the man who had saved her life. His movements were economical, his manner straightforward. He wasn't like the verbose, posturing men she'd known back east. When Declan Galloway spoke, it was because he had something to say. And despite his rugged exterior, there was a thoughtfulness about him that intrigued her. The well-read books on his shelf, the gentle way he tended to his animals, the respect with which he'd treated her from the moment she awoke in his care. That night, As they prepared for sleep with the now familiar arrangement of Olivia in the bed and Declan on the floor, she found herself reluctant to end the day. "Declan," she said softly, "tell me about your ranch. What are your plans for it?" Lying on his makeshift bed, he stared up at the darkened ceiling. "It's not much yet. 20 acres, a small herd of cattle. I've been saving to buy the adjacent property when old man Peterson finally decides to sell. Got plans to build a proper house eventually, expand the herd." "It sounds lovely," she murmured, "a place of your own." "What about you?" he asked. "Always wanted to be a teacher?" In the darkness, Olivia smiled faintly. "For as long as I can remember. I had a teacher when I was young who changed my life, showed me that education was the key to a different future. I wanted to do the same for others." "Noble calling," Declan commented. After a pause, he added, "The school in Madisonville lost their teacher last month, married a rancher from Colorado and moved away. Town's been looking for a replacement." Olivia considered this information, turning it over in her mind. "Is it a good town, Madisonville?" "Decent enough. Growing fast with the railroad coming through. Got about 500 people now. Proper church, general store, even a small hotel. Sheriff keeps the peace pretty well." He cleared his throat. "Just thought you might want to know, since Helena's still a long journey from here." "Thank you," she said thoughtfully. "I'll consider it." The following days settled into an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm. Declan rode into Madisonville as promised, informing Sheriff Taylor of the stagecoach attack and sending telegrams to the proper authorities. He returned with supplies and, to Olivia's delight, a small trunk of her possessions that had been thrown clear of the coach during the attack. "Found it half buried in snow," he explained as he carried it into the cabin. "Figured it might be yours from the books inside." Olivia could have embraced him for this kindness. Having her own clothes and a few personal belongings restored some sense of normalcy to her disrupted life. Among the items was a daguerreotype of her family parents and brothers standing stiffly in formal pose, and a small jewelry box containing her mother's cameo brooch. "This means more than I can express," she told him, clutching the photograph. "I thought I'd lost everything." Declan shrugged, embarrassed by her gratitude. "Least I could do." As Olivia's strength returned, she insisted on taking a more active role in the daily chores. She proved to be an able cook, transforming Declan's simple provisions into surprisingly flavorful meals. She took over the mending of his clothes, tutting over the haphazard repairs he'd made himself over the years. For his part, Declan found himself enjoying her company more than he cared to admit. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, had even preferred it after years of crowded bunkhouses and army camps. But there was something about Olivia's presence that made the cabin feel like more than just a shelter. It felt like a home. They talked in the evenings by the fire, sharing stories of their vastly different upbringings. Olivia spoke of Boston's cobblestone streets and cultural institutions, while Declan recounted tales of cattle drives and the changing frontier. He made her laugh with stories of his more outlandish adventures, and she introduced him to authors he'd never encountered, reading aloud from her favorite books. A week passed, then two. The severe weather continued, with intermittent storms making travel to Madisonville difficult and the longer journey to Helena virtually impossible. Neither of them mentioned the fact that Olivia could have attempted the trip to town during the clear days. It was as if they had tacitly agreed to extend their time together without acknowledging the growing attachment between them. On a particularly cold night, as wind rattled the cabin's shutters and snow piled against the walls, Olivia sat by the fire, darning one of Declan's socks. He was at the table, cleaning his revolver with methodical care. "I spoke with Mayor Prescott when I was in town last," Declan said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Mentioned you were a teacher. He seemed mighty interested." Olivia's fingers stilled. "Did he?" "Said they'd be willing to interview you whenever you're able to come to town. The children have been without proper schooling for nearly a month now." She resumed her darning, her expression thoughtful. "It would be quite different from what I had planned. Madisonville is smaller than Helena." Smaller, yes, but growing. Declan reassembled his revolver with practiced ease. Good people there for the most part. Town's looking to become something more than just another stop on the stage line. Olivia regarded him curiously. You sound as if you want me to stay. Declan's hands faltered slightly, but he kept his eyes on his task. Just presenting options is all. That night, Olivia lay awake long after Declan's breathing had settled into the steady rhythm of sleep. The offer of a teaching position in Madisonville was tempting. She'd come west seeking a new beginning, and perhaps this was it, just not in the place she'd originally intended. But there was another consideration, one she was reluctant to acknowledge even to herself. The thought of leaving this cabin, of no longer seeing Declan's face across the breakfast table or hearing his deep voice recounting the day's events, left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. She turned her head to look at his sleeping form, illuminated by the dying embers of the fire. In just a few short weeks, this gruff, gentle cowboy had become important to her in ways she couldn't articulate. Was it merely gratitude for his rescue, or something deeper, something that frightened her with its intensity? A particularly strong gust of wind howled around the cabin, causing the structure to creak and groan. Olivia shivered, pulling the blankets tighter around herself. The sound reminded her of that terrible night in the blizzard, the bone-deep cold, the growing certainty that she would die alone in that vast white emptiness. And then Declan had appeared, like something from a fever dream, lifting her from the snow and carrying her to safety. Her last thought before drifting off to sleep was that perhaps fate had a hand in their meeting after all. The following morning, Declan announced he needed to ride the boundaries of his property to check for any fences damaged in the recent storms. It was a task he'd been putting off, but with clearer weather predicted, he could delay no longer. "Will you be gone all day?" Olivia asked, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice as she handed him a bundle containing lunch. "Most likely," he confirmed, tucking the food into his saddlebag. "Don't wait on supper for me if I'm not back by dusk." After he departed, Olivia busied herself with household tasks, determined to be useful in his absence. She swept the floor, sorted through his meager supply of provisions, and even attempted to organize his collection of tools, though she quickly abandoned that effort when she realized she had no idea what most of them were for. By mid-afternoon, she'd exhausted her list of chores. Restless, she donned one of Declan's spare coats and ventured outside, keeping close to the cabin. The air was crisp and still, the recent snowfall creating a pristine blanket across the landscape. She admired the view, understanding for the first time why someone like Declan would choose this isolated existence. There was a majestic beauty to the mountains rising in the distance, to the untouched wilderness stretching in all directions. A movement near the tree line caught her attention. Olivia squinted, making out the forms of several deer picking their way cautiously through the snow. She stood motionless, watching their graceful progress, enchanted by this glimpse of wildlife. The sharp crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. The deer bolted, disappearing into the forest in an instant. Olivia froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound had come from somewhere to the east, away from the direction Declan had ridden that morning. Another shot rang out, followed by the distant sound of men's voices. Olivia retreated toward the cabin, a cold dread settling in her stomach. She had nearly reached the door when 3 riders emerged from the trees at the edge of the clearing. Olivia ducked inside the cabin, her mind racing. Visitors weren't uncommon in this territory, but something about the timing felt wrong. She peered cautiously through the window, observing the approaching riders. They were rough-looking men, heavily armed, their horses moving at an unhurried pace as they surveyed the property. With trembling hands, she retrieved Declan's spare rifle from above the fireplace. He had shown her how to load and fire it during their second week together, insisting she know how to protect herself if necessary. Now she checked that it was loaded, then positioned herself beside the window, partially concealed by the curtain. The men dismounted near the stable, conversing in low voices that she couldn't make out from this distance. One of them, a tall figure with a distinctive red bandana, gestured toward the cabin. With a sinking feeling, Olivia recognized him from the stagecoach attack, the one who'd fired the first shot at the driver. They were the bandits, and they'd somehow tracked Declan back to his home. Her mind raced through options. She could attempt to flee out the back, but in the open snow, she'd be easily spotted and overtaken. She could hide, but they would surely search the cabin. Or she could stand her ground and hope Declan returned before the situation escalated. The decision was made for her when the men approached the cabin door. The tallest one pounded his fist against the wood. "Hello, the house," he called. "Anybody home?" Olivia remained silent, the rifle steady in her hands. "We know someone's inside," another voice said. "Saw smoke from the chimney. Just want to talk is all." When no response came, the pounding resumed, more insistent this time. "Don't make this difficult. Open up." Gathering her courage, Olivia called out, "The owner isn't here. Please leave the property." There was a moment of silence, then laughter. "Well, well. A woman. That explains why our friend was so eager to chase us off. Protecting his lady." "I've sent for the sheriff," Olivia lied, her voice steadier than she felt. "He should be arriving shortly." "Now, we both know that's not true," the man replied. "Town's a good 2 hours' ride from here. Why don't you open up so we can warm ourselves? We've had a long, cold ride." "I'm armed," she warned, "and I know how to use this rifle." The threat was met with more laughter, followed by a low, menacing voice saying, "We've got business with the man who lives here. He cost us a good haul and wounded my brother. We aim to settle that score." "He's not here," Olivia repeated, "and he won't be back until tomorrow." Another lie, but she hoped it might discourage them from waiting. There was muttered conversation outside, then the sound of retreating footsteps. Olivia allowed herself a moment of relief, thinking they might have decided to leave. But the relief was short-lived. Through the window, she saw them leading their horses to the shelter of the stable. They were settling in to wait. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The men remained at the stable, occasionally visible when one would step outside, presumably to keep watch. Olivia stayed vigilant, moving between windows to monitor their activity, the rifle never far from her hands. As dusk approached, her anxiety mounted. Declan would be returning soon, riding unsuspectingly into an ambush. If only there was some way to warn him. The fading light brought new challenges. It would be more difficult to see the men's movements in the dark, and they would have the advantage of surprise when Declan returned. Olivia lit a lantern, but kept it dim, not wanting to silhouette herself against the windows. Just when she thought the tension might drive her mad, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching from the west. Declan was coming home. Acting on instinct rather than any clear plan, Olivia threw open the door and fired the rifle into the air. "Declan!" she screamed as loudly as she could. "It's a trap! Bandits in the stable!" Her warning was met with immediate action, men shouting, the stable door banging open, the sound of pistols being cocked. Olivia ducked back inside as a shot whizzed past the doorframe. In the chaos that followed, she could make out Declan's voice shouting her name, the thunder of galloping hooves, more gunshots. She huddled beside the window, clutching the rifle, desperate to help but afraid of hitting Declan in the confusion. Then came a sound that turned her blood cold. Declan's cry of pain, followed by the thud of a body hitting the ground. "No!" she gasped, risking a glance outside. In the dim twilight, she could make out Declan's crumpled form in the snow, with 2 men approaching him while a third kept watch toward the cabin. Something snapped inside Olivia. Fear gave way to a cold, focused rage. Without thinking, she raised the rifle to her shoulder, aimed at the nearest bandit, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but she hardly noticed. The man staggered, clutching his leg, and fell. The other bandits whirled toward the cabin, firing wildly. Wood splintered near Olivia's head as she ducked down, frantically reloading the rifle with fingers that refused to cooperate properly. Before she could chamber another round, the door burst open. The man with the red bandana stood in the threshold, his face twisted with fury, pistol aimed directly at her. "You'll pay for that, lady." Time seemed to slow. Olivia stared down the barrel of his gun, certain her last moments had arrived. Then, impossibly, the man's eyes widened in surprise. He looked down at his chest, where a growing stain of red was spreading across his shirt. He took one stumbling step forward before collapsing to the cabin floor. Behind him stood Declan, his own pistol still raised, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Olivia," he gasped, staggering inside. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she managed, rushing to support him as his legs threatened to give way. "But you're not. Where are the others?" "One ran off," Declan grimaced, pressing a hand to his side. "The one you shot is still out there, but he won't get far in this cold with a bullet in him." Olivia helped him to the bed, her hands shaking as she assessed his injuries. The head wound was bleeding profusely, but didn't appear too deep. More concerning was the dark stain spreading across his shirt, the same side where he'd been grazed before. "Bullet caught me again," he explained through gritted teeth. "Reckon it's more than a graze this time." Working quickly, Olivia cut away his shirt to reveal the wound. The bullet had entered his side, though thankfully it appeared to have missed any vital organs. "I need to get this out," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's going to hurt." Declan managed a weak smile. "Already does, darling." The term of endearment, so casually spoken in such a dire moment, caused something to flutter in Olivia's chest. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. With Declan's instruction, she heated a knife in the fire, gathered clean cloths and water, and positioned the whiskey bottle within his reach. "Take a good swig," she advised. "This won't be pleasant." Declan complied, then lay back against the pillows, his face set in determined lines. "Do what you need to do." Olivia had never removed a bullet before, but she'd assisted the town doctor back home when one of her brothers had suffered a similar injury. She worked carefully, apologizing each time Declan flinched or groaned. After what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, she located the bullet and extracted it with as much gentleness as possible. "Got it," she breathed, relief washing over her as she held up the bloodied piece of lead. She cleaned the wound thoroughly, then bandaged it with strips torn from one of her own clean petticoats. Throughout the ordeal, Declan had remained conscious, his eyes never leaving her face. As she finished securing the bandage, he caught her hand in his. "You saved my life," he said softly. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "You saved mine first, and again tonight." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Heard your warning. Wouldn't have had a chance otherwise." "I was so frightened," she admitted. "When I saw you fall," Declan's expression softened. "Takes more than some two-bit bandits to finish me." His eyes drifted to the body still lying by the door. "Need to take care of that." "Not tonight," Olivia insisted. "You've lost too much blood. Rest now. We'll deal with everything in the morning." Reluctantly, he agreed, settling back against the pillows. Olivia managed to drag the dead bandit outside, covering him with a tarp from the stable. The night was bitterly cold. The body would keep until morning when they could properly deal with it. When she returned to the cabin, Declan had drifted into a restless sleep. Olivia pulled a chair to his bedside and sat watching the rise and fall of his chest, overwhelmed by the events of the day and the realization of how close she'd come to losing him. It was in that quiet moment, listening to his steady breathing in the stillness of the cabin, that Olivia Montgomery acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Declan Galloway. The thought should have terrified her. They came from different worlds, had known each other only a few weeks under extraordinary circumstances. Yet, sitting there in the dim firelight, it felt like the most natural conclusion in the world. She reached out, gently brushing a lock of dark hair from his forehead. "Don't you dare leave me now," she whispered. "Not when I've just found you." Declan's recovery was slow, but steady. The bullet wound was clean, showing no signs of infection, and his head injury proved to be superficial despite the dramatic bleeding. Olivia barely left his side for the first few days, changing his bandages, coaxing him to eat, and reading to him from her books when restlessness made him irritable. On the third day, Sheriff Taylor arrived with 2 deputies, responding to the report of gunfire that a passing trapper had heard. They took charge of the dead bandit identified as Joe Harker, a known outlaw, and took statements from both Declan and Olivia about the attack. "Been after these boys for months," the sheriff explained, rubbing his graying mustache thoughtfully. "Responsible for at least 3 stage robberies that we know of, maybe more. You say one got away?" "Younger fellow, dark hair, scar across his chin," Declan confirmed from his position on the bed. "Third one took a bullet in the leg from Miss Montgomery here. Might have bled out in the snow, or could have found shelter somewhere." The sheriff nodded approvingly at Olivia. "Not many ladies would have the nerve to stand their ground against armed bandits, madam. You're to be commended." Olivia felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "I did what was necessary." "Well, we'll keep an eye out for the others. I'd advise keeping your doors locked and your rifle handy until we're sure they're all accounted for." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Mayor Prescott asked me to convey his invitation to visit town when you're recovered, Miss Montgomery. Says he's got a proposition for you regarding our schoolhouse." After the lawman departed, a comfortable silence settled over the cabin. Declan watched as Olivia moved about, preparing their evening meal with the familiar ease of someone at home in their surroundings. "You'd make a fine teacher for Madisonville," he said finally. "Children would be lucky to have you." Olivia glanced over her shoulder at him. "You think I should accept the mayor's invitation?" "Think you should do what makes you happy." He shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "But I reckon Madisonville would suit you better than Helena. Smaller, yes, but good folk there. Close-knit community." She set a pot to simmer on the stove, then came to sit beside him. "And what about you? Would having me in Madisonville suit you?" Declan met her gaze steadily. "I think you know the answer to that." Olivia's heart quickened. "I'd like to hear you say it." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers enclosing her smaller ones. "These past weeks, having you here, it's been the happiest I can recall being in a long while. Maybe ever." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I know we come from different worlds. You're educated, refined. I'm just a rancher with dirt under my fingernails most days. But when I thought those bandits might harm you, I realized something." "What?" Olivia prompted softly when he fell silent. "That I'd do anything to keep you safe. That the thought of you leaving, of not seeing you each morning." He shook his head, a rueful smile touching his lips. "Well, it didn't sit right. Still doesn't." Olivia leaned forward, her free hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "I don't want to leave either," she confessed. "When I saw you wounded, I realized how much you've come to mean to me. It terrified me, how quickly it happened, but I can't deny it." Declan's eyes, those expressive blue eyes that had first locked with hers when she'd awakened in his cabin, now searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What are you saying, Olivia?" "I'm saying that I care for you, Declan Galloway, more than I thought possible in such a short time." She smiled tremulously. "I'm saying that perhaps fate brought me to your doorstep for a reason." The kiss that followed was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more profound. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Declan rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since the day you opened those beautiful eyes and looked at me like I was some kind of ghost," he admitted. Olivia laughed softly. "And I've been wanting you to do that since you risked your life to check on that stagecoach." As winter gradually loosened its grip on the Montana landscape, Declan's strength returned. The couple settled into a new routine, their relationship evolving from cautious affection to deep attachment. Olivia began accompanying Declan on short rides around the property, learning about ranching and discovering an unexpected love for the wide-open spaces that had initially seemed so alien to her. In early March, when the roads were finally clear enough for extended travel, they rode together into Madisonville. The small town bustled with activity, its single main street lined with buildings in various stages of construction or expansion. Olivia was warmly received by Mayor Prescott and his wife, who insisted she join them for tea while Declan attended to business at the general store. "The position is yours if you want it," the mayor assured her, beaming beneath his impressive whiskers. "Term would start next month, after the spring thaw brings all our outlying families back to town. Salary's modest, but includes lodging in the rooms above the schoolhouse." Olivia thanked him for the offer, promising to give him her answer within the week. When she reunited with Declan outside the Mercantile, she found him deep in conversation with a portly man she didn't recognize. "Olivia, this is Harold Peterson," Declan introduced them. "Owns the property adjacent to mine." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Montgomery," Peterson said, tipping his hat. "Your man here has been trying to convince me to sell him my south pasture for nigh on 2 years. "And you've been holding out for a price no sensible rancher would pay," Declan retorted good-naturedly. Peterson chuckled. "Well, might be I'm finally ready to deal. Getting too old for the ranching life, thinking of moving to Oregon where my daughter settled. Got grandchildren there I barely know." Olivia watched the spark of excitement in Declan's eyes as negotiations began in earnest. By the time they departed Madisonville that afternoon, he had secured an agreement to purchase Peterson's land, a significant expansion that would nearly double the size of his ranch. "This changes things," Declan said as they rode home side by side, the setting sun casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. "With Peterson's water rights and that additional grazing land, I can increase the herd substantially." "I'm happy for you," Olivia said sincerely. "It's clearly been a dream of yours for some time." Declan glanced at her, his expression turning serious. "Means I'll need to build that proper house sooner rather than later. Cabin's too small for a growing operation." He cleared his throat. "Too small for a family, too." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "A family?" He reined his horse to a stop, turning in the saddle to face her fully. "I'm not one for flowery speeches, Olivia, never have been. But I know what I want, and that's a life with you in it." He reached across the space between them, taking her gloved hand in his. "I love you. Probably have since that first night when you opened your eyes and looked at me. Would be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." Tears blurred Olivia's vision, but she was smiling so widely her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Declan Galloway, I will marry you." They were wed in April, just as the first wildflowers began dotting the prairie. The ceremony took place in Madisonville's small church, attended by what seemed like the entire town folks who had quickly embraced Olivia as she settled into her role as the new schoolteacher. Declan, uncomfortable in his stiff new suit but handsome nonetheless, couldn't take his eyes off his bride as she walked toward him in a dress of pale blue silk, a crown of spring blossoms adorning her chestnut hair. Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons. Declan's expanded ranch prospered under his careful management, while Olivia divided her time between teaching and learning the intricacies of being a rancher's wife. By fall, the framework of their new house stood proudly on a rise overlooking the property, a spacious 2-story structure that would be the envy of the county once completed. Winter came again, bringing with it memories of their extraordinary meeting the previous year. On the anniversary of the day, Declan had found Olivia half dead in the snow. A blizzard descended upon Montana with familiar ferocity. But this time, they faced it together, safe and warm in their cabin. "Strange to think," Olivia mused as they sat before the fire, her head resting against Declan's shoulder. "If not for that terrible storm, we might never have met." "Fate has curious ways," Declan agreed, his arm tightening around her, "though I'd prefer if it found less dangerous methods of bringing people together." Olivia laughed, then placed his hand against the gentle swell of her belly. "Well, in about 6 months, fate will be bringing us another person to love." Declan's expression of stunned joy was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're certain?" as certain as one can be," she confirmed, her own eyes shining with happy tears. "Dr. Maxwell confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Declan gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the words he couldn't seem to find. When they finally separated, he kept his hands gently cradling her face. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "A woman I love, a child on the way, land of my own. Sometimes I wake up afraid it's all been a dream." "Not a dream," Olivia assured him. "Just an extraordinary twist in life's path." Their son, Daniel James Galloway, was born the following June on a perfect summer day. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his very first squalling breaths. Olivia continued teaching until the birth, then took a year's absence to devote herself to motherhood. The new house was completed by then, providing ample space for their growing family. Life wasn't without its challenges. The harsh Montana climate demanded constant vigilance and hard work. There were difficult seasons when crops failed or illness struck the herd. The remaining Harker brother was eventually captured and brought to justice, but not before attempting one final act of vengeance that nearly cost Declan his prized breeding bull. Through it all, their bond only strengthened. Olivia never regretted her decision to remain in Montana rather than continuing to Helena. Madisonville became her home in ways that Boston never had been, its people her extended family. She watched with pride as Declan's reputation grew, not just as a successful rancher, but as a fair employer and a man whose word was his bond. By the time their second child, a daughter named Elizabeth, joined the family 3 years later, the Galloway Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. Declan had expanded his operations to include horse breeding, with a line of sturdy, intelligent mounts that were sought after throughout the territory. Olivia eventually returned to teaching, but on a limited schedule that allowed her to balance her professional calling with family life. She established Madisonville's first lending library, housed initially in a corner of the schoolroom, but eventually occupying its own small building on Main Street. Her educational initiatives brought recognition to the growing town, attracting families who valued learning for their children. On winter evenings, when snow blanketed the land and wind howled around their sturdy home, the Galloways would gather before the fire. Declan would tell the children the story of how he'd found their mother in a blizzard, half dead in the snow. The tale grew more dramatic, with each telling the storm more ferocious, the rescue more harrowing, until Olivia would laugh and correct his embellishments. But the heart of the story never changed. Two people from different worlds, brought together by circumstance but bound by something deeper. A love born in the harshest conditions, yet strong enough to weather any storm. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, with their children tucked safely in bed above, Declan and Olivia stood on the porch of their home, watching another snowstorm sweep across the Montana landscape. The scene was reminiscent of that fateful day, yet everything had changed. "Do you ever wonder," Olivia asked, leaning into her husband's embrace, "what might have happened if you'd taken a different trail that day? If you hadn't found me?" Declan's arms tightened around her. "Never dwell on it," he said simply. "Some things are meant to be, and I believe with all my heart that we were." He turned her in his arms. Looking down at the face he'd loved for a decade now, still as beautiful to him as when he'd first seen it. "You came into my life like a miracle in the midst of a storm. Everything good I have, everything I am, began with finding you." Olivia raised a hand to his cheek, feeling the familiar texture of his skin beneath her fingers. "I was so afraid when I first came west, afraid of the unknown, of failure, of being alone in a strange place." She smiled up at him. "I never imagined I'd find not just a home, but the other half of my heart." As snow continued to fall around them, turning the world white and silent, they sealed their reminiscence with a kiss that held the warmth of 1,000 fires. a warmth that had begun on a desperate night when a cowboy found a woman half dead in a blizzard. And she awoke to find herself wrapped in his warmth. The Galloway Ranch prospered for generations, becoming a landmark in Montana's history. But among the family's descendants, no story was told more often or with more reverence than that first meeting in the snow-proof, that even in the harshest wilderness, love could take root and flourish, changing the course of lives forever.